Well, no one that I ever met had a bigger chip on their shoulder than my friend Junior. He was a very angry kid with a very large chip on his shoulder. And I remember telling him over and over, Junior, it's gonna get you killed. It's gonna catch up to you. Something terrible had happened. Something tragic. Next thing my boss says was probably more shocking than I could ever have imagined hearing. He then slowly spits out the words. My freaking jaw dropped.
There is an unwritten code in Brooklyn. You don't tell anyone else's stories, and you don't talk about anyone else's business. Every story I tell is mine. Locations, names, and specific details have all been changed to honor that code. This is Brooklyn Files, the real stories.
When you're from Brooklyn, you tend to develop a tough exterior. It's just the way it is. New Yorkers have a reputation for being mean people. But the truth is, that's not always the case. The reality is a lot of New Yorkers are very heartfelt, warm, loving people. They're just very passionate, so they come off as being a little over the top. But they do tend to have a rough exterior, so I guess it's partly true. So from their outside appearance, they could come off very mean-spirited. But that rough exterior just comes from growing up in a city that's the most populated in America. In a crowded place like New York City, and Brooklyn for that matter, you end up having to fight for pretty much every single thing that you get in life. You might have to fight for a parking spot or a shopping cart. By the way, in Brooklyn, they call it a wagon. It doesn't make sense. I grew up calling it that. They don't call it a shopping cart. You might have to fight for a seat in a movie theater or a seat on a bus or a train or a place in line. Every single day is like a competition, a contest. Not to mention people mess with you when you live in Brooklyn, so if you have a friendly look on your face, you might get messed with a little bit more. Therefore, you want to carry a bit of a rough exterior. It's how you get through the day. It's a matter of survival. One would say, if you're from Brooklyn, it's like you're born with this natural chip on your shoulder. Well, no one that I ever met had a bigger chip on their shoulder than my friend Junior. The year was 1987. I was 18 years old. I was working at this delicatessen. My job was cutting cold cuts for the customers that came in. In Brooklyn, they don't call them deli meats, by the way. They call them cold cuts. And all the old people would come in and ask for their cold cuts sliced really thin. There's just this thing with them, they have to have it thin. If you cut it too thick, they would yell at you and tell you to cut it thinner. They would come in to buy supersada, the gabagool, prosciutto. Customers would actually make you hold the slice up to show them how thin it was before they would allow you to cut the rest of their order. And then they would ask for a sample too, of course, they had to taste it. But despite all that, it was still a fun job. I actually liked doing it. Once you got to know the customers, you could actually mess with them and joke around with them. And you call them sweetheart. Hey, sweetheart, is this thin enough for you? And you hold up the slice. It was a much different time back then. People were less uptight and offended by things. Well, Junior was my coworker, and he was this new guy at the delicatessen. In fact, I was the guy that trained him on how to cut the cold cuts properly without slicing your fingers off. That blade on the slicing machine is one of the most frightening objects on earth. Picture this razor blade spinning and then you putting your fingers near it. It's awful. So I would teach him how to toss the salads and how to make everything look fresh. You would wipe around the edges of the bowl, then sprinkle a little parsley or paprika on the top to make it look like it was made that day. It was really scientific stuff. Anyway, the first thing I noticed about Junior when he started working at this delicatessen was that he was exceptionally angry. He just had this very noticeable chip on his shoulder. It wasn't like a typical person with an attitude, it was like exaggerated. Junior walked around like he was better than everyone and he couldn't do any wrong. Like he had this air about him, it was like this overconfidence. He would pick fights over pretty much anything. And I remember this kid's first week, he was getting into arguments with the customers and he was getting into arguments with our coworkers. He was a very angry kid with a very large chip on his shoulder. again, it left an impression on you. Junior was a couple of years younger than me. He was about 16 years old. At this point, I didn't know what his real name was, and everyone just called him Junior. But even though Junior had this gigantic chip on his shoulder and probably seemed like one of the angriest people I had ever met, over a period of time, he somehow took a bit of a liking to me and warmed up to me. It didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual thing. There was just something about the way I guess I talked to Junior. Probably was a little more patient with him than most people, and maybe I just had a little more empathy than the average person, but he started to open up to me a little bit and tell me how he had this rough life, that his dad would beat him a lot. And that was where a lot of his anger came from. He was also a bit of a shorter guy. He was only about 5'7", so that was probably a bit of a defense mechanism with his hard exterior that he put out there so people wouldn't mess with him, or so he thought. I remember feeling really bad when he told me about how his dad treated him. He told me that his dad would lay hands on him on a regular basis. So I could see how this kid was walking around with this angry chip on his shoulder. But again, there was something about the way I treated him that he was just a little bit gentler with me. And over the next several weeks, the more and more he and I talked, the gentler he became with me, and the more he would open up to me. At some point, I started telling Junior that he needs to curb that cocky attitude around people because he's gonna get himself hurt one day. And I remember telling him over and over, Junior, you just can't come off like that. You can't come off like a tough guy to everybody you meet because one day it's gonna get you killed. It's gonna catch up to you. The first time I told him that, he was really resistant. He said something like, don't tell me what to do, man. This is my personality. I'm not gonna change it for anybody. Deep down inside, I just had this really bad feeling about the way that he carried himself with everybody. At some point, I even went to our boss at the delicatessen and I complained about Junior. I just didn't like the way he was talking to some of the customers. In fact, a couple of them had complained about Junior's attitude to the manager. But when I talked to the boss, he explained that he felt bad for Junior, that he was a bit of a messed up kid and that he'd gotten into some trouble. He told me how at some point he was in the juvenile system for some things that he did. And I guess it was some larceny, theft. And I wasn't very thrilled with working with this kid at first, but over the course of a few months, I came to realize that there was actually this kind-hearted person inside of that really hard exterior. There was just something I liked about him. I don't know what it was. Maybe he reminded me of myself. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I liked him in some weird way. He was just this regular kid that just took a few wrong turns, and the more I got to know him, the more I could see that. This kid just needed to open up to somebody and talk, but he didn't seem to have anyone like that in his life other than maybe a counselor that he had through the juvenile system, until he started opening up to me, of course. So I almost felt like I had this obligation to take him under my wing, so to speak, and I wasn't much older than him, but I did have a more level head, and I didn't get in trouble like he did. So as someone who was sort of a mentor, I would say over and over, Junior, you just can't go around with that chip on your shoulder. It's just gonna get you hurt. I said it so many times. Well, after several weeks working with him, I actually realized that I didn't know his real name. So I decided to just ask him randomly one day. And remember, everybody called him Junior, and no one really knew his actual name. So one day, as we were working, I said, hey, Junior, I've never asked you your name. What is it? And when he answered me and told me his real name, my freaking jaw dropped. One day, after several months of working with Junior, it dawned on me that I had never actually knew his real name. Junior was this angry kid, huge chip on his shoulder, and I took a liking to him, but it dawned on me that all I knew him as was Junior, so I asked him. He told me his name, and my jaw just absolutely dropped. I was speechless. His name was Nicholas, but his last name was what sent me into this shock. Nicholas was related to me. His mother and my mother were cousins, and I recognized his last name and then came to realize that he and I were actually second cousins. I was related to Junior, or Nicholas. And what was even crazier was that I realized that he and I actually had played together at some point when we were kids. I remember always seeing this photograph of myself. When my mom would pull out the family photos, I would just see me and this kid that I didn't know in this backyard. And I was around 5 years old. He was around 3 or something. And I would stumble on this photo from time to time, but never really gave it much thought. And I simply didn't recognize him later on in life. I mean, obviously it was many, many years later. And I mean, what are the odds that you would randomly work with your cousin that was a virtual stranger to you and barely knew? After learning all this and making this first connection, I suddenly remembered that earlier at some point during one of our conversations, when he opened up to me about his father beating him a lot before he disappeared, that was one of the main reasons that he was so angry, or at least that was part of it. I connected the dots at that point, as I remembered always hearing that my mother's cousin was married to a guy that was known to have been abusive back in the day. So it totally started to make sense. It all began to add up. Like the story checked out. So knowing this, I suddenly felt very terrible for Junior. It made me see him in a different light. Not only was he my coworker that I was taking under my wing, in a caring kind of way, but now I came to find that this angry kid, this kid that I've been trying to get through to, was actually related to me. That was sort of eye-opening. So this made things even more personal for me. So back in the day, when I was younger, my mom always told us about her cousin. We'd hear stories about her. This cousin had a boy. He was an only child. His name was Nicholas, obviously Junior. But we had also heard about how my mom's cousin was married to this guy that was abusive to her. And so she didn't go into much detail because we were kids, but we would hear that he would go to the bar, come home late. He would lay into his wife, her cousin. When Junior got older and was in his teens, then the father started laying into him as well. And this was on a regular basis. Apparently one day, many years later, after Nicholas was in his teens, the dad went to work one day and he just never came home. So fast forward to when Junior is now working with me, another month or two goes by, and now Junior, while he's still having issues with his anger, and while he's still butting heads with our other coworkers and even some of the customers at the store, he's still very nice to me. And even more so now that he realized that he and I had this history over a period of time together, and that I actually had a better understanding of what he had gone through. It even got to the point where people around us even noticed it, and they would ask me what my secret was. And there really wasn't any secret, just a matter of caring and having a little empathy and sort of getting to know the kid and talking to him. Plus I told them that he was my little cousin. So now I started feeling a little protective over him. And I felt like things started to take a big turn one evening when he and I had ended our shift at the delicatessen. We had just closed up the place. We both worked the afternoon evening shift. And I could see it in Junior's face that every word that I thought he'd ignored for the past several months had finally sunken into this kid's head. Not all at once, just one conversation at a time, little by little, seed by seed. Though it took a long while and a lot of patience, I could see a change in his face finally. As we were parting ways and we locked up the gates of the delicatessen that evening, it was around 8:30 or so on a Saturday evening in May. Junior would ride his bike to and from work and would chain his bike up on one of the telephone poles outside of our store. And so he unlocks the lock on his bike, he turns to me, gives me this bro hug, and I can't really explain, but the look on Junior's face was that of peace, of trust, like he was finally a changed person. I don't think I ever saw him with that expression on his face before that night. I don't think I ever saw him at that level of peace. It was a first, for sure. As he climbed on his bike, we gave each other one last hand slap, and then Junior rides off into the night. And I remember how that made me feel like all of the talks that I had with Junior had finally gotten to him. He was finally letting go of a lot of anger, or at least it seemed that way. And it was almost like us talking as much as we did at work was some kind of therapy or something. So I was feeling really good about myself and about the situation when I left work that evening. I felt like I'd helped somebody out. The rest of the weekend, it just goes by a normal weekend. Monday comes, and I return to work the same time as I normally do. And as I start getting settled in for my shift, putting on my apron, my manager comes up to me and has this like horrified look on his face. I couldn't immediately read what that look on his face was, but I could tell, without a doubt, something terrible had happened, something tragic. It's Monday, I arrive at work, start my routine, putting my apron on. My boss is approaching me as I'm getting set up, and he has this really dreadful look. I can't even explain it. This look on his face as if something terrible had happened. At first, I asked him, like, are you okay? Maybe he had to go home and he was gonna tell me. His face looked terrible, as if he'd gotten some shocking news. He goes silent, he looks at me as I waited for him to speak, and you could hear the ambient noise of the delicatessen around us, the music on the overhead speakers, the sound of people talking in the background. For me, it all suddenly went silent. But the silence wasn't an absence of sound, but the sound of everything just stopping. Like you could tell my boss was about to drop some tragic news. He was clearly in shock. And all my boss could muster up was, "It's Junior." At the sound of those words, I could feel my pulse getting heavier, and I could actually hear my heartbeat as I waited for the rest. Next thing my boss says was probably more shocking than I could ever have imagined hearing. He then slowly spits out the words, "Junior was killed on Saturday night." And I was in shock. I couldn't believe what he had said. Apparently, moments before my boss approached me, Junior's mom called his job to tell the boss the news, knowing that he wouldn't be showing up that morning. So this poor woman just lost her son, but she was just trying to be courteous by making that phone call. And then my boss explained everything else that happened. On the night, Junior and I parted ways. He rode off into the evening on his bike, and that was something he'd done every evening after we would get off of work from the delicatessen. Just a few minutes later, after he rode out of sight, he'd gone down this residential street and past this schoolyard just a couple of blocks away from our job. And that was a ride he'd done night after night on his way home from work. Well, apparently there were some guys in that schoolyard that recognized Junior as he rode by, and supposedly a couple of weeks earlier, he'd exchanged some words with these guys. And it wasn't anything significant, apparently just Junior mouthing off as he rode by one night, and they'd all yelled at each other. And I guess they chased him, but Junior was able to get away that time. Except that last night I saw him, the guys were a little more prepared for him. They knew that Junior took that route home most nights and decided to teach him a lesson. When Junior rode by that night, they ambushed him. A few of the guys jumped out, started beating him, while another guy took out a .38 and shot Junior right in the head, blew his head off. Someone on the block called 911 as the teens ran away, but it was hopeless. Junior died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. After warning him all those times about picking fights and getting into trouble with his mouth, I never thought it would actually happen, but it did. Had I known that shortly after I had noticed that incredibly peaceful look on Junior's face right before he rode away would have been the last time I'd ever seen him, I would have hugged him much longer than I did. Little did I know that that night, he would be leaving this earth forever. In the following days, the news of Junior's death, Nicholas, hit my family, since he was related to me, of course. And of course, there was a funeral. To this day, I wonder if that look of peace that I saw on Junior's face that night when he and I had parted ways was maybe the look of him having some inside knowledge or something beforehand that he was finally leaving his emotional pain behind for good.